Have you ever stopped to think about how your brain just fills in gaps in images?
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating thing, right? It's actually a principle in Gestalt psychology called closure.
Okay.
And it basically boils down to our brains always wanting to see things as complete, even if
Mhm.
they're not.
So a circle that has a small gap in it.
Exact.
My brain just sees it as a whole circle even though it's technically not.
Right. Your brain just automatically fills in that missing piece.
That's so wild. I never even thought about it like that.
Yeah, and it's a really powerful instinct that we have, and it can be really effectively used in design, actually,
Oh, really? I never would even thought about that.
especially in presentations.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. So you're telling me that I can use this to make my presentations better.
Yeah, for sure. It can actually make them way more engaging and memorable.
Okay, how so?
Well, because your audience is actually actively participating by mentally completing what you've started rather than just passively absorbing the information.
Okay, I'm starting to get it, but how does this actually play out in a presentation?
So think about it like this. You could have a presentation about sustainability,
Okay.
and you could show a picture of a tree, but with some of the branches missing.
Interesting.
And the audience is going to instinctively try to fill in those missing branches just naturally.
Right.
And in doing so, they become more involved with the message without even realizing it.
I like that.
It's like a visual puzzle that they're solving.
Makes sense.
And you can do this with text, too, like a headline that says, "The future of blank."
Oh, yeah.
And the audience is immediately trying to fill in the blank, right? It just sparks curiosity and anticipation right away.
So it's really about making the audience think and participate more.
Exactly. And it's not just visuals and text.
Huh.
Even white space plays a role.
Whitespace. Okay, how does that work?
Well, think about an image that's partially cut off
Mm.
or text that appears piece by piece.
Okay.
Your audience is going to want to connect the dots and see what's next.
Well, that's a cool way to think about it.
So you're encouraging them to use their imagination.
I like it a lot.
And all of that just helps your message stick with them longer.
Okay, but I do have a question.
Yeah.
With all this emphasis on filling in the gaps and leaving things incomplete, is there a risk that the audience could get confused?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, you don't want to leave them hanging or make things too complicated.
Right.
So it's all about finding a good balance.
Balance between being intriguing but also clear.
Exactly. You want to make sure your message is still coming across loud and clear,
Makes sense.
even with those incomplete elements, you know?
It's like a dance almost. You're leading the audience through the information, but allowing them to fill in some of the steps themselves.
Yeah, good analogy.
And what about animation? Does closure come into play there too?
Totally. So you could have like a step-by-step process
Right.
where each step appears one after the other through animation. And as each step appears, the audience is anticipating what's coming next.
Right. And their brains are sort of filling in the process before it even happens.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm really starting to see how versatile this concept is.
It's really about tapping into how our brains work and using it to our advantage to create more engaging and memorable communication.
It's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is.
It's like closure can apply to almost any part of a presentation, right?
Yeah, and it's not just limited to those individual elements either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, think about like the structure of your presentation.
Okay.
Like how it all flows together.
I'm not sure I'm following.
So like we fill in the gaps in an image, right?
Yeah.
Well, we do the same thing with information.
So even if I leave out some information,
Exactly.
the audience will try to connect the dots themselves.
Right. Their brains are wired to make sense of things and create a complete picture.
That seems kind of risky, though.
It can be, but it can also be really effective.
Okay.
The key is knowing what to leave out and what to emphasize.
So it's about giving them enough information to guide their thinking, but not giving them the whole picture,
Right. You want them to be actively involved in figuring things out.
like a puzzle.
Exactly.
And when they feel like they figured it out themselves, it's more impactful.
Exactly. They're more likely to remember it and connect with it on a deeper level.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could work, but how do I actually do it?
Well, think about your presentation like a story
Okay.
with a beginning, middle, and end. You want to create some intrigue from the start, but don't give everything away up front.
So instead of overwhelming them with all the details at the beginning,
Exactly.
I should gradually reveal the information throughout the presentation.
Right, you're sort of teasing them along, keeping them curious and wanting more.
I like that a lot.
And as you go, you can intentionally leave out some information.
Stuff they can figure out on their own
Right.
because they already have some context.
Exactly. It encourages them to really think critically about what you're presenting.
So it's about striking that balance again.
Yeah, between giving enough information, but not too much.
Enough to keep them engaged, but not so much that they get lost.
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
And testing is important too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What works for one audience might not work for another.
You always want to get feedback and make adjustments as needed.
So we can use closure in how we actually structure the presentation itself.
Yeah, not just in the individual elements.
And it's all about creating an experience where the audience is actively participating.
Yeah, not just passively sitting there listening.
This is really making me rethink my entire approach to presentations.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
It's really powerful stuff.
I'm actually starting to see closure everywhere now.
Once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere.
It's like I've been missing this whole other layer of communication.
Yeah, it's like a secret code almost.
This kind of blows my mind a little bit.
But it's also really exciting, right?
Yeah, it is like I'm seeing the world in a whole new way.
That's the best part about learning about these principles of perception. It changes how you see things.
So are there like any real-world examples of closure being used effectively? Like outside of presentations?
Oh, tons of them.
Yeah.
One that always comes to mind is the FedEx logo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, do you know there's an arrow hidden in the negative space between the E and the X?
Now that you mention it, I kind of see it.
It's a really clever use of closure, right?
It is.
They're using our brain's natural tendency to fill in the gaps to create a hidden message.
And it reinforces their brand identity, too.
Yeah, it's pretty brilliant.
It makes me wonder what other things I've been missing all this time.
It's all around us.
This is so cool.
Yeah, it's all about understanding how our brains work and how we can use that knowledge to become better communicators.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
That's what it's all about.
It's like I have new superpower now. I can't stop seeing closure everywhere.
It's like a whole new way of looking at the world, isn't it?
It really is. So as we wrap up here, are there any like key things to remember about using closure effectively?
I think the most important thing is to remember that it's a tool.
Okay.
And like any tool, it can be used well or poorly.
So it's not just about randomly throwing in incomplete elements.
Right. It's got to be strategic.
It has to have a purpose.
Exactly. You have to think about your audience and what you're trying to communicate.
And finding that balance again.
Always about balance, right?
Not too much closure, not too little.
You don't want to confuse people, but you also don't want things to be boring.
Right. And testing is important too.
Oh, definitely.
Because what works for one audience might not work for another.
Exactly. You always want to be getting feedback and adjusting your approach.
This has been so helpful. I feel like I'm ready to go back and redo all my old presentations.
That's the spirit. Just remember to have fun with it and make it your own.
Use closure in a way that feels natural to you.
Exactly.
This has honestly been so eye-opening. I never would have thought about presentations this way before.
Well, I'm glad you found it valuable.
It's just amazing how our brains work.
It really is. And the more we understand about how our brains work, the better communicators we can be.
I completely agree. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been a really fascinating conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something new and that you'll start to see closure all around you. It's like a hidden language that's been there all along, and now you have the key to unlock it. Until next time, keep those brains engaged and those gaps closing.